what is wrong with policing we have very little idea about in Pakistan. तो किसी औरत के साथ ये हुआ है, we shouldn't be asking कि उसका motive क्या था, right? तो don't turn the victim into a criminal, right, or a suspect. The power structures work in Pakistan is they want the police to be a certain way. Hi, my name is Zoha Waseem. I'm a research fellow at University College London. So I'm basically doing what they call a postdoc, which is like a research fellowship, and it's something you do after your PhD. So मैंने अपनी PhD complete कर ली थी 2018 में. तो उसके बाद I was teaching for a year, and now I'm on a postdoctoral fellowship. My area predominantly, or my work predominantly, focuses on research. So I'm at the Institute of Global City Policing at UCL, and over there I work on multiple research projects. So some of them are continuing what I was doing during my PhD, and then there are some that are new as well. So basically, I think I've been in academia for a long time now. So I started with a law degree at SOAS, also in London, and uske baad I remember, you know, the study of terrorism was a very prominent issue and subject at the time, and it was a very important subject at the time. So I got really interested, and I think I was kind of, you know, pushed into it by my father, or encouraged into it by my father as well, who's a former police officer. So he was always interested in sort of studying about security and terrorism, and I got interested because of that as well. So then I did my master's in that, and then when the time came to kind of apply for a PhD, at that time I was also interested in studying about terrorism and security and also organized crime. तो जब मैंने PhD शुरू करी तो उस वक्त कराची being home was the main kind of space I wanted to study, or the main jurisdiction or geography I wanted to learn about. लेकिन उसमें, you know, there were you know, when you look at Pakistan has obviously you know, in the study of the war on terror, Pakistan has played a very, you know, prominent role. So बहुत लोगों ने उस पे काम किया है, terrorism पे, security पे, crime पे, but policing पे किसी ने काम नहीं किया था, and there was a familial interest because of that as well. So I was like, okay, nobody has ever actually studied how the law enforcement responds to terrorism or you know, multiple security risks. So I think I got really interested in that कि बाहर मतलब, you know, western context में तो हम, you know, देखते हैं कि पिछले 50-60 साल से बहुत research होती है पुलिस के ऊपर, policing के ऊपर, and on various issues on policing. So police violence हो गया, you know, their relationship with society हो गया, or other aspects of policing, lack of legitimacy, lack of public trust. But there's very little interest in Pakistan, although it's the one institution we criticize the most and we interact with the most as well. And like, you know, matlab har roz, you know, there'll be some interaction with a police officer if you want to get a, you know, an NIC made, if you want to get a license made, if you want to resolve a dispute, that's where you go. But what is wrong with policing we have very little idea about in Pakistan. So I thought this was a very significant gap in academia and in research and in Pakistan. So that's how I got interested in it. So I focus on multiple things. So when I started the PhD, at that time I was looking कि अगर हम कराची को देखें, for example, so it has been, you know, a key city in Pakistan's war on terror. तो हमने यहाँ पे political violence भी देखा है 80s 90s में, हमने sectarian violence भी देखा है, फिर हमने 2001 के बाद we have seen it, you know, being affected by different forms of violence. So there's been gang violence, there's been terrorism, sectarian violence, political violence, protests, etc. as well, and lots of innocent lives have been lost. So I was looking for my research or for my PhD, I was looking at कि जो security policies बनी हैं in response to all these forms of conflict, उसमें पुलिस का क्या रोल रहा है, and how is the police affected by these policies, and what has the police been basically doing. So the story of the police is what I was researching on, but now I've kind of broadened my scope a little bit. So I also look at कि for example police की relationship minorities के साथ किस तरह से होती है. तो especially for example जो बिल्कुल marginalized communities होती हैं, जैसे you know, people who are living in very marginalized neighborhoods like Machhar colony for example, what do they think about the police, how do they interact with the police. So because I think like this is true anywhere in the world, the most marginalized communities are often the ones who are worst affected by police abuse or police violence, corruption, etc. So that's one of the things I'm looking at right now, and then I'm looking at other factors as well, like police reform ho gaya, for example, which is often in the news, but what actually happens, what are the politics behind police reforms, and reforms hote kyun nahi hai, matlab 20 साल से हम सुनते आ रहे हैं कि बड़ा effort लगा है police reforms में, but they don't take root, and they don't lead to any change in policing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, it's been a, it's a very serious problem. I think there's also a lack of empathy in dealing with such forms of violence. Social media पे बहुत बात हो रही है, औरत march, the women's march के हवाले में उसमें भी काफ़ी बात होती है. But I think in police especially there is some increasing awareness about it, but I think it's a long way to go. And I think that when it comes to gender-based violence or violence against children, I think that policing should not be the answer necessarily, because इसमें multiple इदारों को I think काम करना होता है. So not just like the government, but also NGOs, civil society organizations, etc. And I think that the role of the police is to to partner with these organizations and these agencies to address these issues, because I think that किसी औरत के खिलाफ अगर कुछ होता है, she's not going to feel comfortable going to the police, neither will a child. Honor की बात आती है, इज्जत की बात आती है. So in order for it to become handled as a criminal issue or a criminal matter, other organizations need to step in, and there needs to be better trust developed between the police and these other organizations, because उनको एक middleman का इदारा बनना है. So I completely agree. I think the motorway incident is a prime example of the lack of empathy that is sometimes shown, and I of course the police officer who commented on that issue, I think a lot of other police officers or his colleagues distanced themselves from that remark, right? Because they knew कि वो सही बात नहीं हुई है, and he got a lot of criticism and he has been removed. He was a political appointee. I think that's pretty obvious now, pretty clear now. तो वो भी बात सामने आई है. He was, उनकी भी काफ़ी reputation खराब हुई in the matter. But it shows you that he was a product of something. What he was saying is a product of our society, and our society kind of thinking through a lack of empathy and a lack of regard कि किसी औरत के साथ ये हुआ है. We shouldn't be asking कि उसका motive क्या था, right? So don't turn the victim into a criminal, right, or a suspect. I think that is what the police often does. So the training has to be better, and they need to be working with other organizations. Varna they can't just learn in the job themselves. Yeah, so that's a good question. So generally in most countries, or in some countries at least, academic research जो होती है, so it should be having some sort of impact in shaping policy. Researchers, for example, in the US or UK, Canada, etc., they look at, okay, so how they look at crime, or they look at police violence, or they look at in police की different internal organizational dynamics, and उस पे वो research करेंगे, and they'll try to figure out what the problem is, and then they'll offer recommendations on that, and then based on those recommendations, the governments will try to come up with policies to change things, right? So Pakistan is a little behind in that, because उसमें अभी हमारी मतलब academic research की इतनी space नहीं है यहाँ पे, तो value भी नहीं है, value कम है. मतलब there are very select institutions in Pakistan that carry out proper good research. So policing is a kind of subject कि आप उसको different lenses से पढ़ सकते हैं, different disciplines से पढ़ सकते हैं. So you can be doing sociology, and you can go आगे in your academic career, and you can specialize in looking at the sociology of policing. Similarly, you can be studying criminology, and you can study policing through a criminologist lens. और अगर आप आजकल in the last few years, lots of political scientists have also been studying policing. So I think law is a good foundation to have. I think for me it was a very good foundation to have, because it gave me a good idea about different disciplines as well. And then I think उसके बाद मैंने जो भी पढ़ा है, it's drawn from different disciplines, but law was always a good foundation to have. It's still very much we're following a colonial model of policing, and although you'll hear a lot about it, but there's very little done to change that, because I think successive governments जो भी आए, जो भी power में आए हैं, all the rulers, civilian, military we've had, I think they've benefited from having a certain kind of policing structure, right? They like their police to kind of serve them and not the people, if I can be frank. So I think that has sustained, and I think that was an interesting finding. There's been a lot of money spent on reform reform efforts. There's been a lot of conversation around reform efforts, but it doesn't really materialize to anything because the way the power structures work in Pakistan is they want the police to be a certain way. No, I don't think there's a specialized degree on policing for civilians. I know that there are policing academies, but those are for police officers. But that said, like I said, कि policing and law enforcement को आप different disciplines के through पढ़ सकते हैं, criminology के through, sociology, political science, and there are those departments, especially like Lahore में LUMS है. So I know that within LUMS, like there are a lot of sociologists and anthropologists, and a couple of them have been interested in studying the police in Pakistan. There's also a research center in Lahore that works with the police. So career path, for me, I think it's so far academia. So I'm what they call an early career academic, which is when you're doing a postdoc, which is when you're fresh out of a PhD, you're like an early career academic or an early career researcher. तो PhD के बाद आपके पास multiple options होते हैं. आप normal job भी कर सकते हैं, anything. You can work in academia as a lecturer and then make your way up to professor, for example. So, ideally that is the aim, to go up the ladder, the academic ladder, and get to that professor level, inshallah. The other option is policy as well. A lot of academics choose to go into the policy side of things. So they'll be working for think tanks, for example, or they'll be advising governments, or you can even do both. You can be in academia or you can be in the policy side of things as well. So the best piece of advice, I think, would be to develop a thick skin. But I have not done that. I think it requires a very different kind of a personality. Maybe someday, maybe I'm less sensitive over time. But I think academia can be very cutthroat as like other professions. So I was told very early on in the day to develop a thick skin. But I think I like doing field work, which basically means कि आप different इलाकों में जाएं, लोगों से बात करें, उनकी problem समझें. Whether that is in a thana or that is in a neighborhood, I like kind of getting my hands dirty and doing a bit of leg work. It's very challenging emotionally because sometimes you're confronted with a situation and you don't know how to handle yourself, and you feel very exposed and you can't be very sensitive, and this is also where your thick skin is required. But I think the kind of observations and things you learn in the field, I don't think you can learn that from books. So I particularly enjoy that, and I like to think it's a strength of mine. Yeah.